thank you so much for introducing. I would like to start my presentation with the topic Formative and Summative Assessment. Hopefully, this is the question that is important and interesting for all the people who joined this meeting today. This is the plan that I'm going to follow. First of all, I would like to talk about assessment learning cycle and 3 types of assessment validity, because this is important no matter what kind of assessment we are applying. The second, difference between formative and summative assessment. If we speak separately about them, then how do we differentiate them? Let's talk about it for a while. Next, I will talk about types of summative assessment and types of formative assessment. And closer to the end of the talk, I hope to address the topic of assessing proficiency versus achievement. And finally, rubrics to measure student learning. So these are the points I want to highlight during this talk. First of all, let's look at assessment learning cycle. We always begin planning and reflecting of what we have done in our teaching process, and then we go on to actual teaching. And while we teach, we always observe and monitor our students, how they are doing in their learning process. And hopefully the process of learning takes place where students self-evaluate themselves and they kind of record what they are learning. After this, assessing should take place because we need to know the results and the feedback from students, and reporting assessing again leads us to planning. This is how cycle goes all the time. David Newman, in his book about assessment, specialized this hierarchy of evaluation. Evaluation is a broad notion that includes all kinds of procedures. Further, it is narrowed to assessment, and testing is viewed as a part of assessment. So assessment is kind of broader term than testing, and evaluation is a broader term than assessment. This is to make it clear. So what's the definition of assessment? Assessment is a process of reasoning from evidence. It does not exist in isolation, but must be closely aligned with the goals of curriculum and instruction. And I hope that it happens in every classroom. Now let's look at assessment triangle. There are 3 corners in this triangle. First of all, cognition, then observation, and finally, interpretation. What does it mean? Cognition corner of the triangle refers to the theory or set of beliefs about how students represent knowledge and develop competence in the subject domain. And this is the upper corner of assessment triangle. We should have an idea how we think students acquire the knowledge that we try to teach them. Observation corner of the assessment triangle represents a description or set of specifications for assessment tasks that will elicit illuminating responses from students. And finally, interpretation triangle, a corner of the triangle encompasses all the methods and tools used to reason from fallible observation. So assessment that we do has to be valid. And there are 3 types of assessment validity: content validity, constraint validity, and criterion-related validity. Content validity, it includes 2 points: meaning and procedure. For meaning, we have to answer the question, how well does the sample of tasks represent the domain of tasks to be measured? And procedure, compare the test tasks to the test specifications describing the task domain under consideration. When I talk to my students about assessment and about content validity, I keep saying, you cannot assess students on the points that you haven't taught them. So whatever you assess should have been done in class before. You should have taught the vocabulary that you are checking. You should have taught the grammar you are checking. And the procedure of assessing should follow the procedure that they have done in class. You cannot start from a vacant space. There should be ground under your assessment procedure. Criterion related validity, first of all, answers the question, how well does test performance predict future performance or estimate current performance on some valued measures other than the test itself? Compare test scores with another measure of performance obtained at a later date for prediction or with another measure of performance obtained concurrently for estimating present status. As the previous speaker outlined, very often in the classroom we teach for tests, and if criterion related validity is observed, it reminds us that we do not only teach for tests, we teach for life. And construct validity is another thing that helps us connect the testing or the assessment to real life. How can test performance be described psychologically and experimentally determine what factors influence scores of the test? This is important because we have to realize that the scores of the test not only depend on the quality of the student knowledge. Sometimes psychological factors interfere or physiological factors interfere, like whether the student is feeling okay on the day of the test, whether the temperature in the classroom is okay, or it might be too hot or too cold. The student might be hungry, the student might be sick, and this all, of course, influences the test result. So construct validity is the factor that reminds us of the fact that we assess human beings. We have to take it into consideration. Now, let's look at difference between formative and summative assessment. Formative assessment is a teaching tool used on a daily basis to determine how much students have learned and how much they still have to learn. This can be determined through assignments and homework, quizzes, and class discussions. While summative assessment is a teaching tool that evaluates students basing on their performance and the basis of determining the progress made by the student for the unit that has been discussed and for the school year as a whole. This Venn diagram shows us how formative and summative assessment can be opposed. There is some area which is specific for formative assessment, and there is an area specific for summative assessment, while there is also an area that is referring to both types. Formative assessment is a part of the instructional process. It includes quizzes, observations, creating T-charts, Venn diagrams of the student learning evidence. It includes classwork and homework, writing text certificates, and it helps teacher modify future lesson planning based on learner needs. While summative assessment is used to determine a particular point in time what students know and do not know. It includes state assessments, district benchmark or interim assignments, end of unit or chapter tests, end of term or semester exams, scores that are used for accountability, SAT or ACT type tests. So this is specific of summative assessment. Now, both of them are assessment. So both are ways to assess. Questioning strategies need to be addressed. Both need to be used to evaluate a student effectively, and both can be used for student feedback. They both assist in future lesson planning. Now, a closer look at that. Formative assessment and summative assessment are two overlapping complementary ways of assessing pupil progress in schools. And while the common goal is to establish the development strengths and weaknesses of each student, each assessment type provides different insights and actions for educators. The key to holistic assessment practice is to understand what each method contributes to the end of goals, improving school attainment levels and individual pupils' learning, and to maximize the effectiveness of each. Summative assessment, if we explain it in more detail, aims to evaluate student learning and academic achievement at the end of a term, year, or semester by comparing it against a universal standard or school benchmark. Summative assessments often have a high point value, take place under controlled conditions, and therefore have more visibility. They are more noticeable in the school process because they give us scores to talk about. They give us scores to tell students. Examples of summative assessment include end-of-term or mid-term exams, cumulative work over an extended period, such as a final project or creative portfolio, end-of-unit or chapter tests, standardized tests that demonstrate school accountability are used for pupil admissions, SATs, GCSEs, and A-levels are another example. Now, formative assessment explained is more diagnostic than evaluative. It is used to monitor pupil learning style and ability, to provide ongoing feedback, and allow educators to improve and adjust their teaching methods, and for students to improve their learning. Most formative assessment strategies are quick to use and fit seamlessly into the instruction process. The information gathered is rarely marked or graded. So we might say that summative assessment is assessment of learning and formative assessment is assessment for learning. Examples of formative assessments can be impromptu quizzes or anonymous voting, short comparative assessments to use how pupils are performing against their peers, 1-minute papers on a specific subject matter, lesson exit tickets to summarize what pupils have learned, silent classroom polls, and this all forms ask students to create a visualization or doodle map of what they learned. So formative assessment types are various and they are inseparable from the process of teaching, I believe. Now there are some questions to consider about summative and formative assessment. And the first question, I believe, is why is assessing pupil progress a challenge? Let's look at this question. Pupil assessment, both formative and summative, is deemed an imperative part of the education process on the one hand, but on the other hand, standardized in exams and informal testing are blamed for the narrowing of the curriculum and teaching methods and contributing to damaging levels of students' stress and pupil stress. So it's kind of contradiction that is inherent in assessment. And I want to tell you that we are not lonely in the problems that we face during assessing students. I was listening to you and I realized that the problems that you are facing are similar to the problems that I'm facing in Kazakhstan. And I read about research conducted in the United Kingdom, which discovered that the report that was the result of this research revealed that 1/5 of the teachers in the UK are unclear where to go for information on assessing their pupils, and what's more, teachers feel unsupported when it comes to training for assessment. Less than half of educators received assessment training as part of their initial teaching training. So add to this the problem of changes in the process of assessment that are introduced daily in connection with the development of new technologies, and you can understand why assessing pupil progress is a challenge. Now, another question is, how do formative and summative assessment fit together? The distinction between some types of summative assessment and formative assessment can be hard to identify. For example, schools may use benchmark testing to monitor the academic progress of pupils and determine whether they are on track to mastering the material that will be evaluated on the end of course tests. And this kind of testing is considered by some educators to be formative, because it is diagnostic and it helps to modify learning techniques. But some other people think that this is a summative type of assessment. Now, another Venn diagram, another look at formative and summative assessment in comparison. So formative assessment forms part of the instructional process. It helps teachers modify teaching methods and future lessons based on needs to improve lessons. It includes quizzes, voting in lessons, creating diagrams or charts to demonstrate learning, homework or classwork, and exit surveys. Summative assessment determines what students know at a particular point in time. For example, end of a learning segment. It improves overall school performance. Includes end of year assessments, midterms or end of term exams, end of project portfolios, coursework, SATs, GCSEs, A-levels, IB, and all kinds of other tests. Both are ways to assess pupils and must evaluate pupils effectively, are used for student feedback and assist in future lesson planning. I began my presentation with reminding you of the cycle of learning that includes assessment. Another question to consider that is important and very exciting for most of the teachers: how could teacher workload be reduced? Because teachers, whether focus on assessment or take assessment as a part of their teaching, have to work a lot to prepare their classes, conduct them, and then assess the students' level. So let's look at this question. First of all, the Department for Education should separate student exam results from teachers' direct performance evaluations, because it is not the same. The students show results that depend not only on the teachers, teachers' performance, because some students are simply unable or ignore what teachers are trying to teach them, and thus show poor results. So what students show at the end of the test is not necessarily a true reflection of the teacher's job, of the teacher's performance. Second idea that can help to reduce teachers' workload in connection to assessment: teachers can share assessment tools and tasks that they create, thus save each other's time. We all have colleagues that work using similar materials. Why not decide who prepares which part of the assessment and share the tasks? This will help us save some time. And another way to reduce teacher workload is using online assessment tools that check students' performance automatically. There are a lot of tools that allow you to make quizzes, and if you insert the correct results, then the system checks students' quizzes automatically and you don't have to do it. Like, for example, I use edmodo.com system that is an online platform designed in the United States, and it is very popular in the world. And this platform allows me to create quizzes, and it then systematizes the results of quizzes and assignments that I send to students into their grade book. And I give both assignments that I check by hand, that is, I read what students wrote and give them marks for that. And I also send them all kinds of quizzes, like here, where they do the quiz and the system checks it automatically. This year, when in the pandemic, we had to start working distance, to do distance learning with our students. I started using it for classes, not as additional tool, but for main tool for my classes. And I counted the time, how much time I spent doing this work. And I realized that creating a quiz might take me 3 hours, but then I don't spend any more time because all my 80 students take the quiz and the system checks it automatically. While creating an assignment takes me 5 to 10 minutes. It is very quick. I just send, write a project or write an essay and send it to students. But then checking takes me 30 hours because when 80 students send me their essays and I start reading them and correcting them, that takes a lot of time. So creating quizzes looks time consuming in the beginning, but then you can use them and reuse them, and it helps you save your time. The fourth question I think is exciting is that what are ways to use assessment to enhance learning? I believe assessment should not only be used as a measure of students' result, it can also help students learn more effectively. And the first idea here is that a midterm assessment or module final could be tasked as a visual presentation, a long form test, or an individual essay. So we can give a variety of assessment forms to students to check how they are doing in this or that topic. Next, technology enhanced assessment requires students to interact with exam material in various ways: dragging and dropping answers, highlighting relevant data, completing sentences or equations in the drop-down menu. And this fosters students' digital literacy and prepares them for life after education. So I think this is important. We are not just testing, we're helping students build some skills that are good for them in their future life. And also, ways to use assessment to enhance learning include these two. First of all, by allowing students to explain their material in the medium they feel comfortable with, such as on module devices, teachers get an accurate picture of their pupils' understanding. So, rather than saying you have to write an essay on paper, I say you can type it on computer, you can type it in your mobile, you can make a mind map, you can present your ideas in the way that you find good. And the first time I ask students to do it, it is kind of how to say, they get lost, they are puzzled, they don't know how to do it because they are used to teacher demanding a particular form of assessment. But when I give them freedom, it makes them think about it better and it makes them make their own decision, which leads, I think, to the building of students' decision-making capability, which is an important skill for future. Teachers can also set final exams or assessment in a form that resembles vocational assessments or job applications. And this can cover a broad range of material and prepare students for performance in a working environment, providing a stepping stone for the future. This idea is especially good for professional colleges that do not only provide students with some skills important for their future job. If we make assessment close to what is going to be a part of their everyday life in their job, this can be very helpful in my mind. So those were 4 questions that I wanted to discuss with you. And if you have more questions at the end of this presentation, there will be a kind of discussion session, and you can send your questions to the chat, and conference organizers will give me your questions. I will be able to answer them, hopefully, if I am qualified. Now, let's talk about assessing proficiency versus achievement. A major challenge for language testing is that the qualities being researched or tested are abstract, invisible psychological qualities such as aptitude, motivation, and language proficiency. And the only way that we can gather information on this phenomena is through observation or elicitation of some kind of performance on the part of the learner. I am sure all of you teachers have had students in class who are silent, and they never perform until you ask them to. And sometimes teachers make, how to say, quick judgments, quick decisions, and think that these are students who are not proficient. While on the contrary, shy students might be really proficient and they might know a lot, but simply not prepared to perform in front of their classmates. So very often we don't know what our students know. Also, Brindley, in his 1989 work, draws a distinction between the assessment of proficiency and assessment of achievement. So this is not a new idea. This has been around in education for decades already. Proficiency is meant to be independent of any particular course of study, while achievement refers to the mastery of the learner of specific curricular objectives. Proficiency is typically assessed by rating students on a proficiency rating scale, while achievement assessment can be carried out more informally using a wide range of instruments, including teacher-constructed tests, self-rating scales, learner self-reports, teacher or learner diaries, and videotaped or audio-taped samples of learners' work. Again, I can share my own experience and say that sometimes assessing becomes difficult because I see that a student in my class is trying hard. She is doing whatever I ask to do. She is doing even a bit more. And all the same, when she writes a formal test, she either fails or gives very low results. That makes her so sad, and that makes me sad because I see that she is much better than she was in the beginning of the term. She is improving, but she never is quick enough to be successful in the tests. So I was very happy to discover this contradiction and this possibility to assess proficiency is what we always do, but to assess achievement is another idea. And this is my decision to make, whether in this particular assessment type, I am going to judge students' proficiency and give marks for how much they know, or whether I am going to assess students' achievement and progress and probably give marks to the process, give marks to the students' effort that they invest into their learning. Now, I wanted to talk about rubrics to measure students' learning as an instrument that helps us do both formative assessment and summative assessment. Rubrics assist students in both completing tasks and thinking about their performance because this is a description of what we expect them to do. And these tools allow teachers to create rubrics for assessment quickly with greater level for meaningful feedback. They can also easily be shared among teachers and saved or modified for future assignments. I love RubyStar and recommend this site as a tool to create rubrics. RubyStar for Teachers is an online tool and you can create rubrics for free. You have to log in. It is free of charge, and then I will show the process now. I don't have the time to log in and all kinds of things, how it works. So I choose oral progress project. For example, I want to create a rubric for class debate. So here I write my name and all kinds of things. And here is the chart for me to complete. It has 4 columns that show the results expected by students for each particular mark. So the highest mark is 4 and the lowest is 1. And here there are categories that we are going to assess. For example, for this kind of project, oral project, I think an important category is respect for other team. So I choose this category and here we are. All the descriptions for students' progress are written, are prepared by the experts in the education field that are working in this site. Then I think whether information is important for my project. Okay, information should be the next category. And again, the description of performance of students for each mark is already described. Like, for example, for the highest mark, all information presented in the debate was clear, accurate, and thorough. For Mark 3, most information presented in the debate was clear, accurate, and thorough. That is a bit lower. And for 2, most information presented in the debate was clear and accurate, but was not usually thorough. And for 1, information has several inaccuracies or was usually not clear. So you choose as many categories as you think are necessary for you, and they are all described. And then here you can submit and decide whether you want this rubric to be published online or you can print it as a result. Further in my presentation, I've got more examples of this. So what is a rubric actually? A rubric for assessment, usually in the form of matrix or grid, is a tool used to interpret and grade students' work against criteria and standards. Rubrics are sometimes called criteria sheets or grading schemes or scoring guides. Rubrics can be designed for any content domain, not only language, anything. Why use rubrics? A rubric makes explicit a range of assessment criteria and expected performance standards. Assessors evaluate a student's performance against all of this rather than assigning a single subjective score. A rubric handed out to students during an assessment task briefing makes them aware of all expectations related to the assessment task and helps them evaluate their own work as it progresses. A rubric helps teachers apply consistent standards when assessing qualitative tasks and promotes consistency in shared marking. How to create a rubric? You could use an internet tool or you could do it yourself. First of all, you should report the performance objective, what you want your students to achieve. Then you should identify the dimensions or tasks comprising the performance. Identify the potential gradations of quality. Assign a point value to each gradation and total point value for the assessment. You should identify the criteria for each level of quality within a dimension or task, and finally create the rubric table. Or again, you can use RubyStar, which is quick. There are a lot of rubrics that have been already made by teachers, so you can use search keywords and then search for ready-made rubrics, or you can follow some teacher you know and search rubrics that they have made, or author, based on author email address or any type. Now, from this menu that appears on your screen, you choose what you want to prepare a rubric for. And here you see there are oral projects, products, multimedia, science, research and writing, and work skills. Then you start creating your rubric by choosing from the menu within the category that are drop-down menu. Like here, for example, the first criteria, the first category chosen is comprehension, and it describes student achievement for each grade that is already prepared, that is quick to make. Next, you choose another category, and here it fills the boxes with description of student performance that is given for each grade that you want students to do. And if the student knows it before they start doing their task, then they can expect what kind of mark they're going to get, and they know what is the highest possible degree of their performance and how to achieve it. They can plan. Then you click submit, and here is the rubric that I prepared. 3 categories described student performance to a very particular detail, and now I have to decide whether I want to print it or download it or make it available online. So these are the references that I used for making this presentation. You can follow the links or use the books to study more and read more about it. And now I'm open to your questions. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Marina, for your very technical speech. And here are a few questions from the participants, and we would like to raise some of them. The first question is, could you please explain how summative and formative assessments can be both overlapping as well as complementary?
I see. Formative assessment is what you do every day in your class, and you teach students some vocabulary and then you give them exercise, and exercise is already formative assessment. And when they do the exercise, you tell them whether they are achieving the result or not, whether the sentence is correct or incorrect. It is formative assessment. Then when you create summative assessment at the end of unit, you have to include exercises with the similar tasks. For example, it was fill in the gaps or match the terms to their definitions. You just choose other words that they had in those exercises, but do a similar kind of exercise. Then in the formative assessment, students are familiar with the tasks and then they do them more successfully. This is my idea. Thank you.
And the next question, thank you, Dr. Marina. The next question is, doesn't summative assessment promote learning for the test?
It depends on the type of summative assessment that you give your students. Like, for example, in my course that I delivered this term, and it was project method for teaching English. The summative assessment was a project that students did. And I don't think this project would help them a lot in doing a test because they acquired different skills. They acquired a different range of skills like doing independent research, planning their project, then writing the first draft, peer evaluation, preparing an article on their project and publishing it in a student conference. So those were the skills that they acquired, not testing. It all depends. Summative assessment was the project that they submitted and I checked. So this summative assessment did not help them with testing. But if my summative assessment was a kind of test, and we have been doing informative assessment parts of similar tests, this would certainly contribute to testing.
Thank you, Dr. Marina. How would peer assessment form a part of either formative or summative assessment? Could you please detail a bit on it?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Peer assessment, which students do amongst themselves. Yeah. Could you please throw some light on how can that be a part of summative or formative assessment?
I think peer assessment should be formative, not summative, because summative assessment is kind of serious. It is the result that we give students that are put into their, grade book, and students in peer assessment can prepare can help each other to prepare for the summative assessment, but peer assessment should not be summative. It should be formative, certainly. Assessment for learning.
Dr. Marina, that is the next question. You have mentioned some types of tests such as SAT, ACT, GSE, A-levels, and IB. Can you please explain a bit about it?
These are types of tests that are that are organized in Great Britain, and here in Kazakhstan we teach British English, and I hope I speak British English, and this is the kind of testing that is given to students at the end of their school, or when they enter higher educational institutions, or when they prepare for some kind of professional training. You can simply use these abbreviations as search, keywords in your internet search, and you will find full descriptions of tests. It would take a lot of time to explain. Sorry.
There is one question from our participant Sunil Bogche from Maharashtra. Can we take monthly tests for assessment, especially for higher secondary students? Will it be convenient to both students and teachers?
I think so. I would even think that formative assessment is not taken monthly. It should be taken at every lesson. And monthly summative assessment, if students get used to it, helps them to be prepared for big national tests. So I think, yes, why not?
So if a student is unable to take final year exams, should he or she be promoted on basis of formative assessment?
I don't think it is possible because formative assessment does not have this educational value as summative assessment. It can complement summative assessment. It can prepare students for summative assessment, but it cannot directly lead to students' promotion or something of the kind. Sorry.
Can we take one last question, Dr. Marina?
Yeah, sure. You're welcome.
What are the issues in language testing regarding summative and formative testing? Are there any ways to overcome them?
There are a lot of issues, and one of the issues I think is that it is necessary to assess all 4 language skills that students acquire while learning the language, that is reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And to assess each level takes time. For example, the tests that are internationally recognized like IELTS and TOEFL, these tests are very long and they take more than 3 hours, and sometimes are given, like IELTS, for example, not in 1 day, but in 2 days. It takes a lot of time, both to prepare and to go through this test. While at school, our lessons are short, and even at the end of school, at the end of year, our examination should be quick. We don't have 3 hours to test each student, and students cannot simply sit that long. I mean, school students, they are young and it is physically impossible for them. So this is an issue. We have to divide our summative assessment into portions, like 1 day we assess only grammar and vocabulary, another day we assess only reading, another day we assess only listening, and then we have to summarize all the assessment, or we have to spend these long hours testing our students. I think this is an important issue. It is really difficult to measure language proficiency because this is inner psychological state of knowing a language, of being able to understand it, or not knowing and not being able to understand.
Thank you, Dr. Marina. Do you think we should close the session, or do you have time for one more question? The choice is yours.
I do.
Hello. What's your opinion about continuous professional development? Is there a link between assessment and continuous professional development?
I think so. There is a link because assessment is a part of learning and continual professional development is the process of learning in a way. And teachers, there is a I'm Russian speaker, you know, and there is a Russian teacher who said, Ushinsky, who said, as long as the teacher learns, the teacher can teach. As soon as they stop learning, they cannot teach. And I quite agree with this quotation. I'm sure that every teacher should continue their professional development as long as they work. I myself have been teaching for 33 years and I'm still learning. I take MOOCs, I go and do research online myself. I try to master new tools because I'm still planning to work. And while I'm working, I have to be learning. And if I'm learning, I want to know my results. So at one point, I took TOEFL test to measure my language ability that made me feel comfortable because the result showed that I now don't only feel that I know the language, I know that I know the language because I successfully took an internationally recognized test. And then when I do an online course, for example, then I want a certificate at the end. I want to be assessed and I want to see the percentage of my success. So yes, assessment is connected to learning or to professional development of teachers or whatever profession.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Marina. Thank you, participants, for the interesting questions you threw up. And on behalf of the organizing committee of PSG College of Technology and ELTAI, I extend my hearty thanks to Dr. Marina for her very informative presentation on formative and summative assessment. Thank you, ma'am, for having taken us through principles underlying assessment. And you've also shared with us some of the ways of using assessment purposefully in the classrooms and the different tools and instruments available for us. I hope we will all try to implement some of your ideas in our teaching circumstances. Thank you very much once again. Over to Dr. Shankar for other technical information. Thank you.